Mass incarceration means that we've got a very high rate of incarceration, historically, comparatively. And the other thing is the rate of incarceration is so high, so socially concentrated, that we're no longer incarcerating the individual, but we're incarcerating whole social groups. The rate of incarceration now is about 5 times higher than it was historically. Historically it was 100 per 100,000, now it's about 500 per 100,000. If we look at prison, if we add jail to that, it's about 700 per 100,000. Nowhere in the world incarcerates as much as we do. We've seen extremely high rates of exposure to the criminal justice system for African American men with very low levels of schooling. So if we think about black men who were born in the late 1970s and who are growing up through the American prison boom of the 1980s and the 1990s, the chances that they're going to serve time in state or federal prison if they dropped out of high school is about 70%. So going to prison for that group of black men with very low levels of schooling, that's become a normal life event. And that's really only happened in the last 10 years. We're at this point now where there's about 1.2 million African American children with a parent who's incarcerated. That's about 1 in 9. The research shows the kids who experience parental incarceration have diminished school achievement, they have behavioural problems, depressive symptoms, acting out. And there's also evidence that these kinds of negative effects associated with parental incarceration are concentrated more among boys than among girls. And there's a very real risk here that incarceration becomes an inherited trait. The underlying issue is we've chosen prison as a way to respond to that problem of crime. And there are a whole variety of ways that we could have chosen to respond to that problem of crime. We've chosen the response of the deprivation of liberty. And we've chosen the response of the deprivation of liberty for a historically aggrieved group whose liberty in the United States was never firmly established to begin with.
Hi. Got a tape I want to play.
A former Secret Service agent is making a startling claim about a bullet found after the John F. Kennedy assassination. 60 years after the assassination, former agent Paul Landis is claiming he tampered with evidence involved in Kennedy's death. Landis, who is now 88 years old, was assigned to the security detail of First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy on November 22, 1963. He was traveling with the motorcade in a parade through downtown Dallas when the then president was struck by 2 bullets, one in the head and one in the neck. Landis recalls to People, ahead of the release of his book, the moment he heard the first shot. He explains that he immediately recognized it as a gunshot and started scanning around. He remembers that by the time the third shot rang out, an agent rushed to Kennedy's side as the motorcade raced to the hospital. Upon arrival, Landis says he ran to the president's vehicle where the First Lady was sitting with her husband's head laid in her lap. He recalls taking in the scene as other agents and hospital staff descended on the car. He claims that when the First Lady got out of the car, he noticed a fully intact bullet sitting on the backseat ledge where the cushion meets the metal on the car. Landis claims he picked the bullet up, looked at it, and started to put it back when he realized nobody was around, so he put it in his pocket. The former agent described it as a quick decision, saying he debated it just for a second, but ultimately he decided he, quote, didn't want that bullet to disappear. Landis eventually decided that putting the bullet on the president's hospital gurney next to his left foot was the best thing to do because it would eventually be found. Landis goes on to claim that he planned to detail the bullet during the larger investigation known as the Warren Commission, but he says he was never questioned. Now, 60 years after the assassination, Landis describes the bullet to People as having no real sign of blood on it, but he knows it had been fired because he saw striations. According to the Warren Commission, there were 3 bullets fired, but the first one missed its target and most likely hit a nearby sign with scattered fragments found nearby. Still, Landis is quick to note that he has no theories about the significance of the bullet or how its existence might change the way some people think about the president's assassination, which was determined to be the result of a lone gunman, former U.S. Marine Lee Harvey Oswald.
It's just like a shot out of a cannon.
His voice?
My God, who is that? He created the rock and roll icon.
Sorry, y'all. It wasn't Elvis.
I am the king of rock and roll!
The first songs that you love that your parents hate is the beginning of the soundtrack of your life.
Little Richard's lyrics were too lewd to get airplay on the radio.
They was not that dirty. They were just as clean as you were.
The South is the home of all things queer.
They called him a sissy, a punk.
I was not supposed to be the hero for their kids.
Little Richard has an incredible string of hits.
And so what they did was they said, we're gonna put the white bucks on him.
Got a gal, her name's Sue. Knows just what to do.
Shut up!
The legacy of Little Richard is complex.
Did you know that Elvis Presley and Pat Boone sold more of Tutti Frutti than I did?
Little Richard was renouncing his queerness.
He didn't want to burn in hell. That's the way we were taught.
He was very, very good at liberating other people. He was not good at liberating himself.
Little Richard gave the world permission to be.
Ready, set, go, man, go! Long Uncle John with bald head salad. He saw Aunt Mary coming and he ducked back in the alley.
Michael was inspired by me. Prince, James Brown, I discovered him. Jimi Hendrix was my guitar player.
I used to stand on the desk and do Little Richard.
I love you, Paul. Hello, Linda.
Everyone was beholden to him.
He spit on every rule there was in music.
I was unpredictable. They didn't know what I was gonna do.
Now you got it, God gave it. Show it to the world. My.
Like a year ago, we were in the parking lot of his preschool, and he said, I hope I die before the world catches on fire. So here we are. This is a cat saying, ah, and this is a person running away saying, ah. You're really excited about your sign.
We need to have leaders in crisis mode. I don't sense that. Countries are not doing enough, especially those industrialized countries and the big emitters.
Russians, state media has released a rare video of American Paul Whalen in custody.
The American citizen was convicted on espionage charges in 2020, which he denies. This is a still image of the video. Now, we are purposefully not airing it in full as it likely serves as Russian propaganda. The video shows Whalen folding strips of green material at a sewing machine while an off-screen voice asks him questions. In a statement to CBS News, Paul's brother David says, quote, "I wish I could see Paul under better circumstances, but it was good to see him again and to see the fight that remains in his eyes." Let's bring in Humera Pamuk. She's a senior foreign policy reporter at Reuters and a friend of mine who covered the State Department with me for a very long time. It's nice to see you. How should we read into the rare release of this video? This is the most we've seen of this American in quite some time, right?
That's correct, Christina, and thanks for having me. It is such a rare that we see that kind of video, that kind of a glimpse into Paul Whelan's life in Mordovia, which is a penal in Mordovia, which is a region famous for its notorious for its penal colonies. Even his brother David Whalen, in an email, also said, "This is the first time that I have seen him in 3 years." We see him in different parts of the prison, in cafeteria, like you said, by a sewing machine. It's hard for us to try to think what the Kremlin-backed channel was thinking, why they decided to air this at this point in time, because we know from David Whelan's email that they actually tried to film this in May. They asked Paul Whelan if they could interview him. And in the footage, we see him declining to answer their questions as well. So it comes like 3 months after that. Maybe they just prepared it. But it is also at a time when the Biden administration is spending an increasing amount of time, energy, and resources to try to bring American detainees home.
So we know that Secretary Blinken spoke with Whalen on the phone earlier this month. Do you see the timing of the release of this video and that call having anything to do with each other?
I mean, it's very hard to read into their mind, right? But it's an interesting coincidence. This was the second time Secretary Blinken, I believe, spoke with Paul Whelan from prison. U.S. ambassadors to Russia are trying to regularly visit Paul Whelan, but it's not super frequent for U.S. Secretary of State to speak with him from prison, and that was only a few weeks ago. So perhaps they wanted to give the rest of the world a rare glimpse into what a U.S. citizen's life is in this penal colony.
Spanish prosecutors opened a criminal investigation into whether this kiss was an act of sexual assault. Spanish Soccer Federation President Luis Rubiales grabbed midfielder Jenny Hermoso's head, kissing her on the mouth after the team's World Cup win last week. FIFA has suspended Rubiales for 90 days pending its own investigation. And overnight, the Spanish Soccer Federation withdrew its support of Rubiales after a marathon emergency meeting, saying he should immediately present his resignation because of the latest events and the unacceptable behaviors that have seriously damaged the image of Spanish football. The incident at the award ceremony causing outrage. In locker room celebrations afterward, Hermoso can be heard saying, "I didn't like it." Rubiales apologized the next day, but later in the week claimed, "Hermoso lifted me off my feet, held my hips, my legs. We hugged," he said, accusing critics of false feminism and social assassination. His family rushing to his support. His cousin says, "We don't think what's happening is fair," adding his mother has locked herself in a church and gone on a hunger strike. Hermoso said she was pressured to say at first that the kiss was a natural expression of affection and gratitude, but now says, "At no time did I consent to the kiss that he gave me." The incident sparking protests in Spain and signs of support across the sports world. Crowds cheered Hermoso at a game over the weekend, with teams holding banners and U.S. players wearing wristbands saying, "We're with you." Spain's sports minister calling this the Me Too moment of Spanish football. And Spanish men's teams and coaches have also backed Hermoso and her teammates. All 23 members of that World Cup winning team are now refusing to play unless Rubiales steps down. And this morning, the sports minister said it's over. No more discrimination for women. Peter?
Kelly, thank you so much. A couple weeks removed from the World Cup, and this thing just keeps developing.
Keeps going, doesn't it?
मिलकर हालो रे हालो हालो रे हालो रे हालो रे हालो हालो सब सखी मिलकर हालो रे हालो हालो रे हालो रे हालो रे हालो हालो सब सखी मिलकर हालो रे हालो रे केसर तिलक लगा लो रे ओहणे तो सो देवो बधाई वादी जाऊं रे ओहणे तो सो देवो बधाई वादी जाऊं रे वादी जाऊं रे बलहारी जाऊं रे मैं वादी जाऊं रे बलहारी जाऊं रे सतगुरु आंगन आया मैं वारी जाऊं रे मारा निर्गुरु आंगन आया मैं वारी जाऊं रे
There is nothing wrong with those kinds of warm relationships, obviously, between a private individual and significant government leadership, even in the context of a military contractor relationship. But this is something more and different. And, you know, I talked to a lot of historians to get a sense of how new this is. The fact that we can only put crew into space, that NASA has to go through Elon Musk and no one else. The only alternative we have right now at this moment, probably for the next year, is sending people up via Russian launches. Mm-hmm. The fact that if we want to advance green energy policies around electric vehicles, we got to go through Elon and his charging stations because he's got 60% of the stations in the country.
Right.
Historians told me that is a new extreme and a newly political dimension to this kind of private power.
Specifically on the Russia's war in Ukraine, I think the most obvious example for most people at home is when he decided to end the internet service through Starlink that he exclusively offers to the Ukrainian military, and that's how they communicate, obviously. He then reversed that, bemoaned the cost, but is the Pentagon, is the government attempting to unravel this at all now that everyone knows the dependence?
Well, two things happened. One is at the end of this story that is one of the many stories told in this profile of a standoff over internet access in Ukraine, where it appears he was talking to Vladimir Putin. He was telling multiple people that at the time, though, as you point out, he has since tried to deny that. And then he was curtailing access specifically in areas that Russia was contesting. At the end of that, one of the things that happened was the Pentagon did pay up. They just said, you know, we're going to get a deal in place to make sure this doesn't shut off entirely. But, you know, the other thing that happened is people on the ground in Ukraine, people on the front lines remained spooked, right?
Right.
We bought his services apparently at a very, you know, generous rate. This is a situation where metaphorically he had the US government and the Ukrainians at gunpoint. Yeah. And to this day, they do fear that he is going to curtail service more. It's very hard to get people to talk in that context, and I'm glad that some did.
We all lie. And anybody tells you that they don't lie is a liar. On December 24th, 1968, at about 8 p.m. at 157 East 57th Street, did you shoot Jimmy Smith in the head?
I was set up and framed by the New York City Police Department because I uncovered the corruption of the police department in the 1970s.
We are not dealing with a few rotten apples by any means.
We can expect policemen on all levels to be indicted.
He was Patrolman P.
What percentage of the plainclothes do you feel participated in the past?
Everyone.
New York City's police department
has been shocked and angered by the Knapp investigation.
For the last several days, the honor of us all has been under attack. The dishonest cop is not our brother.
He was the principal witness who indicted 50 policemen. What easier way than to frame him with a double murder and you clean up their whole dirty mess.
I've been 33 years in prison for something I didn't do. 33 years.
I think a lot of people, they might just say, wow, this poor old man, and they'll never really look at the hardcore build that he's trying to conceal.
At that time, there was availability. Temptation, I felt a temptation. I fitted in because I was such a trusted guy for so many years.
These are the bad things he did, but he says he didn't do the homicides.
The only way to find out what's going on is to get cops to talk, and cops don't talk.
Did you shoot Charles Gonzalez?
No.
Still trying the ultimate final manipulation in his life.
I just want to go and show the people that I'm not the guy.
He was a rat, he was a dirty cop.
It's a thin line. You're right down the line. There are guys out there that know, that they know.
And joining us now is Democratic Senator Gary Peters of Michigan, who joined the picket line in solidarity at the Ford plant in Wayne, Michigan this morning. Senator, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. Why was it so important for you to be there with the workers?
Well, I wanted to stand in solidarity with the workers who are embarking on this strike, a very critical time for them to make sure that they are able to have fair wages, benefits, secure retirements. You know, these are workers, and I've been around a while. These are workers that sacrificed a great deal to make sure that these companies stayed in business. I was around 2008, 2009. The union made substantial really accommodations for the companies, a two-wage structure sacrificed, and the companies emerged from that. And now they look at these companies are doing extremely well. They've been doing well for a while. Already this year combined over $20 billion in profits. The CEOs and senior executives have gotten very large pay increases and are making hundreds of times of what the average worker makes. And they're saying, we want to be treated fairly. We were there when the company needed us. We're there now every day. The success of the company is a result of the hard work that we're putting forward, and we should be fairly compensated. So I hope the parties are able to come together. Clearly, no one wants to have a strike. No one wants to have a long strike. But a lot is at stake right now, and I think it's at stake not just for the UAW, but also for workers across this country who have also been squeezed, particularly middle-class workers who continue to get squeezed while they see folks at the very top reaping huge financial rewards.
Also, for the White House, there's an election in 2024, and a long-term strike, a lengthy strike, would have a huge impact on the economy and on public attitudes. What role should the president be playing? He's going to speak at any moment from the Roosevelt Room.
Well, you know, right now you have to let the process move forward in collective bargaining. Collective bargaining is about making sure that both parties have a chance to come to the bargaining table and negotiate and come to an agreement that works for both sides. So that has to continue to play out. It's not about the government getting involved in negotiating these contracts. That's what the unions are for, and they are the ones that need to continue to drive that process. But I know, you know, you talk about some of the politics associated with it. We have to remember that right now unions have a moment. If you look at public opinion polls and the favorability of unions, it is very high. In fact, it's the highest it's been since the 1960s. Folks look at labor unions and how important they are in order to bring wages up for middle-class workers. You know, when I think about 1960, the last time these favorability ratings were so high, the average CEO made 30 times what the average worker makes in this country. That was at the peak of the union movement. Unfortunately, unions have membership is down, but with right now you have CEOs that make several hundred times what the average worker makes. And that's why young people in particular are very encouraged by unions, are looking to form unions. So the country is looking at this and looking at the UAW and the workers and saying, we hope you're successful.
It's hard to imagine a presidential candidate in the United States who's not impressed with any of the major political parties, who wants to stand up for racial equality and the working class, and wants to sort of unplug the military-industrial complex. But that's exactly what my guest today is doing. He is Dr. Cornell West, one of America's most prominent scholars and activists. I'm going to start out. People are worried about the impact you have. I want to know why you're running. What do you want to bring to this race and to the national conversation?
Why? Because I've always viewed myself as part of a prophetic tradition that brings critique to bear on unjust status quos and tries to empower poor and working people wherever they are. But what has happened in the last couple of years is that we haven't had voices on the inside that have in any way tried to speak to poor and working people. So I decided to do what? Become head of the American empire in order to dismantle the American empire and empower poor and working people around the world. And my candidacy, my brother, is just a moment in a larger global movement, increasing voices from around the world, every corner of the globe, calling for policies that would accent their dignity. And so in that sense, it's quite continuous with my own prophetic sensibility. It's just that you're right. Now I'm going inside in order to dismantle, to ensure that those resources available there can be made much more available to poor and working people.
What would day one of a Cornell West presidency look like?
What I've told my beloved wife, I said, you know, if and when I win, I'm not even going to move into the White House until everyone has a house. That the first day is going to be one in which a paradigm shift has taken place. The first day is one in which we're going to begin the demilitarizing of U.S. foreign policy, the pull back of all the military troops in too many places. Is going to be one in which Wall Street and Pentagon and Silicon Valley elites will begin to tremble because we'll cast a light on their organized greed, not in the spirit of hatred. It's like Jesus in the temple, and I'm no Jesus, but Jesus in the temple ran out the money changers, not because he hated the rich, he hated greed. And this campaign is about a hatred, not of persons, of greed, a hatred of injustice. That will be the spirit of a West administration. And I was just going to say, I pardon Julian Assange and Snowden and Mumia Abu-Jamal and a whole host of political prisoners. That's what I was going to say, my brother.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Cornell West. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, man.
You might have seen Salvation Mountain in music videos or in documentaries. It attracts people. Even for folks who aren't religious, this hill, covered in 500,000 gallons of latex paint and sitting in the middle of the sun-blasted California desert, this hill has something about it. And it was the work of just one person.
Leonard Knight was a man who was kind of lost, just cruising around trying to figure out what to do. He discovered Jesus, so he had a mission. And then he started doing things, and he made a hot air balloon, like 200 foot, sewed it all together with all these praises of God on it, brought it out here. The desert ended up taking its toll on the balloon. But he stayed and he built this mountain. You really have to look at it to get the big picture. That sand hill, that way, shows exactly what was here. A couple of little straggly bushes and a flat hill of sand. And Leonard built all this. He added extra clay, hay bales, whatever it took to build this all up. He just kept going and going. He was going to dome the whole thing off. And he never really thought of himself as an artist. He more thought of himself as somebody just doing what he was doing. He was a persistent dude. This mountain originally fell after 3.5 years of building. He rebuilt. He wanted, he had a passion, and this is so beautiful, 28 years of dedication. Try dedicating 28 minutes to something nowadays, realistically. I think about that.
Leonard Knight had no training, no collective of other folks around him. The technical term is outsider art. He wasn't inspired by anyone else's work, unless you count God. He wasn't imitating great artists. He wasn't asking for feedback from friends around him. He just created this, and it resonated with the world. Years after his death, there's a group of people here who give their time preserving his legacy.
We have so many people coming from everywhere. I've met people from little countries in Africa to all over Europe to, floating little islands and this and that. It's amazing. And some people, they come here, for the religional deals on it. Cool. Some people come here for pretty people taking pretty pictures at a pretty place, which, to be respectful, and that's cool too. You know, it's getting you out, you're doing stuff. They're getting off their couches and getting off away from the TVs and stuff, which is, TV is awesome too, though, so I'm not knocking TV. Paint donations that we get here, most of them come from the visitors. They'll bring a couple of cans turn into 100 cans. Let's say I wanted to paint that heart. I would have to wait a considerable amount of time till I had enough really beautiful red to mix up to paint that heart. And then it makes it so much more satisfying when you do it. But the best thing is, the art paint comes really from the heart, from the people.
Even if this were to fall apart, it's inspired so many people, filmmakers, pilgrims and tourists alike, that it'll live on in memories, in photographs and, yes, in music videos. The moment I knew about it, I wanted to come here and see it for myself.
I started volunteering here because I realized how important it was to everybody that came here. And so I volunteered more. And then eventually they had me be like a greeter, and I would da-da-da-da-da. Then I was like, well, can I paint while I greet? Oh yeah, go ahead, da-da-da-da-da. Next thing you know, I'm the caretaker, and I've been living here a year and a half. In my heart, I'm the preservationist of this place. I've tried to paint it all the same and make it beautiful and keep it, you know, when I fix it good. If I can't fix it good, don't fix it yet. Leave it alone. Leave it alone till you can do it right. The biggest thing is this is about love. Leonard's love was God and his relationship with Jesus, but all kinds of love is awesome. Like these people all just love cruising around and hanging out, you know, doing stuff. That's all makes everything better. And then we don't think about all the dumb crap in this world. And you know what? Then the dumb crap in this world really becomes dumb crap in this world, and it doesn't have a powerful voice. There's not many places in this world where it's good and nothing's expected of you. We hope you would donate money to us because that's how we do it. But if you don't, cool. We got free souvenirs anyway, and there's constantly stuff going on. But if you show up on like a Saturday, you get to see what this is really about. It is just packed with people having a good time, respecting the mountain, respecting each other. It's awesome.
Some folks would say it's divine inspiration. Some folks would be a bit more cynical and say that it had to be someone. Of all the millions, perhaps billions of people who ever tried creating art with no experience and no training, yeah, statistically, someone was going to hit the jackpot, but it's difficult to be cynical here. So I brought a couple of cans of paint along as part of my own pilgrimage, because as it turns out, I want to help preserve this as well.